Hello and welcome back to the Infinite X. My name is Patrick, and today we're going to talk about factions, what they are, and how you can use them in your RPG games to make your worlds and campaigns feel more alive and more breathing. We're going to go through some examples, I'm going to give a short definition, and then I'm going to talk a bit about how you use them in your RPG games. Let's start with the definition. So what's a faction? A faction is pretty much a group of people, an organization which have a shared belief system, a shared aim, what they want to achieve, or they operate under some, let's say, like codex or value system, which they then adhere to and make their decisions based upon that. And for a pure definition of what a faction is, that's already it. There's nothing more than that. A group of people who have a shared belief or follow the same goal or adhere to some kind of codex or value system. Examples would be, for example, from the real world, you could say humanity. If you go into the Star Trek world, then humanity is definitely a faction, as are the Klingons and the Vulcans and the Ferengi and whatever. If you go into our world or into our reality, then you could say that the Catholic Church is a faction, or Germany is a faction, or the EU is a faction, or the United States of America is a faction, or let's say the CIA is a faction and the FBI is a faction. Some more examples would be corporations as factions. They definitely have a shared goal, like the management ranks, they want to further the company's profits. So that's a faction. And if you're going into RPG games now, for example, you have a resource-rich cave system, and then you have two villages which fight about this cave system. But you could also have an order of paladins, which is a faction. A kingdom could be a faction. A thieves guild is a faction. Everything that has a shared goal, every organization or group of people which have a shared goal is a faction. So generally you see it's not hard to understand what a faction is because we all know what they are. We are all dealing with them in our lives, be it like governments you have to interact with or the police. You could also say maybe that a soccer club or a whatever basketball club is a faction because they are like, that club wants to win the championship. So they have a shared beliefs and it's a group of people. So I guess theoretically a soccer club would be a faction as well. So I guess the more interesting question is how you use them and what they can do for you. Imagine a game without factions. And I don't think that's even possible because even if you just have one starting village and a couple of NPCs that give out quests or that have problems that need solving, you still have a few factions in there. You have the village, which probably shares a goal or like something they want to achieve, and they have an organization. They probably have a mayor or a reeve or maybe like an elder council. So that village would be a faction already. In that village, you could have, for example, NPCs, and they technically aren't factions, but they can serve the same purpose because they also have an agenda, what they want to achieve. They have a problem that needs solving. So they kind of are a faction as well, or they serve the same purpose than a faction, but they aren't, technically speaking, they aren't one. So in my opinion, if you would have a world without factions, you would have an empty world. Because there is, like, as soon as you have someone who has some kind of problem or some kind of agenda, then you already have a faction. So I guess it's not possible to have a game without factions. And that shows you how important they are. They are pretty much baked into society because everyone has a goal, and then people with the same goal, they get together and form a group, and then you have a faction. For example, if you would have a noble, maybe that noble like alone is no faction, but he or she has enough money to hire mercenaries and maybe have some members of lower nobility. For example, you have a duke and then there's a baron under that, whatever. And then they all together form a faction while the faction's goals and aims are the same of that one noble. They just have enough influence and enough money to buy people to form a group, and therefore you have a faction. And where there's one noble, usually there are more of them, and then they have the same goals, just from their point of view. So they also want to be the ruler of the valley or the region or whatever. But you have 2, 3, 4 nobles, and that already is enough input for you as a GM to form quests, storylines, interactions between these factions, interactions between the factions and the surroundings, like villages that they control, villages of other nobles. You could have the evil paladin order in between, which serves like different nobles based on which is more serving for their own purpose they have. For example, they want to resurrect an evil god which has been dead for 5,000 years or whatever. So now one of the nobles defeats the others and becomes the king. Maybe the party helped him because the noble is a benevolent and benign person, and they decided to help this one because the others were all worse or evil or whatever. Now this noble is the king, and now you are like zooming out to the next level, which would be a kingdom level of factions, where you could have wars involving armies of hundreds of thousands of people, or peace treaties, trade contracts, whatever, like international relations between different kingdoms. So you see how important the idea of a faction is, because it's the lifeblood of conflict. And as I said in a former video, conflict is really the lifeblood of every campaign, because without conflict there is no reason to fight. If the world is just peace and happiness and dancing around trees, you know, the hippie idea, then there is no conflict and there isn't really a game except Stardew Valley, where you have a farm and you grow crops and chickens. So I started with the high-level factions like kingdoms and dukes and barons and stuff like that. But this obviously counts also for, let's say, like a city. You have a Thieves Guild. You have the city guard, you have the mayor and his people. The city guard, for example, would be a sub-faction of the government of the city, like the mayor, and they maybe have been instituted with the same goals in mind, but maybe they, over time, they veer off on their own path. And maybe they start following their own goals, you know. Maybe the city guard has a scheme to get rid of the mayor and place one of their own there. Maybe they were bought by some evil person who has, let's say, like bad intentions for the mayor or for the city and wants to take control. So you see that these factions and their relations, they can be very simple. King, duke, baron, rather simple idea. Or very much like connected, like a network, like spaghetti, and every faction is connected with each other. So you have the city guard and the government. You have the Thieves Guild, who maybe works together with the city guard, or the other way around. You could have other criminal factions. You could have a mage faction who wants to, whatever, develop automatons which can guard the city on their own, and that goes horribly wrong. So there are so many ideas for factions, and it's so important to make use of these ideas and of factions, because they make everything a lot more interesting. And if you develop them properly, and if you run them properly, which I will make another video about, then that will really increase the feeling of your campaign being alive, moving in the background. You know, just because the party stops, your world doesn't stop. It continues spinning, and factions do their thing. There's something called a faction turn, and so on and so on. So they are really important, and they can be a super cool instrument to make your campaigns a lot more interesting. So before we come to the end of the video, I want to talk about a faction that is actually very important, but I haven't talked about it yet, and that would be the party. They are a faction on their own. You know, they have their goal. They want to achieve whatever. They want to become rich. They want to become heroes and want to become famous, or maybe like infamous for what they have done. So they are a faction on their own. And obviously, if they don't die in the dungeon and they go up in level, they will come to a point where they will have enough money to build a stronghold, maybe like a wizard's tower, whatever they want to do. And then they can become a real faction. Like every one of your players can become one faction moving around. Then you can have, for example, play out that maybe two players, you know, they get in conflict over something they both want to have. Or maybe they form like an alliance and they take over the entire kingdom and make it the most beautiful place in the world. All scenarios that can happen if you make use of factions, and if you then also, and that's the other really important part, not just have these factions and have them live and do their own thing, but also provide your players with enough choice and enough opportunities to interact with these factions and incorporate them into the game on their own, to make friends with them, to become enemies of them. to interact with them. If you do this, your players will really enjoy your world, and in turn, you will enjoy your game also a lot more because your players are happy, and that should make you happy. And I think this is enough theoretical stuff about factions. In one of the next videos, I will talk about how you implement them, how you run them, so we can go over that as well, and you get an idea, if you don't know already, how you can do that. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I'd say see you next time on the Infinite Techs. Bye bye.